Hey everybody, I'm Mike Kazimer. If you've been following along this season, you'll know that upside down forks are having a little bit of a resurgence. Just like baggy jeans, they're coming back in fashion. And we saw them all the way back in the early 2000s, the Marzocchi Shivers of the world. They're more common then. Kind of fell out of favor. The Manitou Dorado's still been carrying the torch, but this season we saw Fox release their podium fork. And we also saw Push release version 2.0 of their 9-1 suspension fork. Other companies obviously in the mix too. We've got Intend over in Europe, and Cane Creek has been teasing an upside down fork of their own. But today we're going to be focusing on the Push 9-1 V2.0. This fork is made in Colorado. It's priced at $2,250 US, so it's not especially cheap. You might even call it expensive. I will call it expensive. It weighs in at 2,950 grams, so it's not especially light, but it does have some pretty cool features, and it might make it an interesting fork for some riders out there. It's coil sprung, a bunch of different spring weights that you can purchase and swap out to allow it to suit your rider weight. It has high and low speed compression on the top right side of it, 28 clicks of each, and then on the bottom, you got your rebound dial, 18 clicks of rebound. And there's also this dial here, which they call the Subchamber. It has two positions, open and closed, and when you close it off, it makes the spring curve a bit more progressive towards the end of the stroke. So you still get that nice supple coil springiness in the beginning of the stroke, but then later on you get a bit more ramp up. It's less linear, so that makes it harder to use all the travel, which could be useful if you're hitting some bigger drops. Maybe you're in the bike park riding some big jump trails where you're going deeper in the travel. Just easy to reach down, turn that to the open or closed position depending on what you're looking to do. Easy as that. In addition to that, at the bottom, you have a pneumatic bottom mount. So hidden underneath here, a little air chamber, and you can inflate that to adjust the amount of bottom mount resistance. So it's very, very unlikely that you'll ever have a harsh bottom out with this fork because you have that pneumatic bump stop. So yeah, it's just right underneath here. Put in up to 50 PSI, somewhere around there. I have to check the article for the exact max PSI, but I've been running around 40 PSI. I've been very happy with that. So those are the basic features as far as the adjustments go. Oh, you also have some little, the scientific term is fart valve, I believe. These right here, you give those a pull, and that lets any trapped air that's in the uppers, it's an upside down fork. So it wouldn't be the lowers if it was your usual fork. But anything that gets trapped in the uppers, easily released by just pulling on these little valves, keeps that fork from having any air built up inside. Other features before we go into the thing that everybody wants to know, how this fork rides, you have a available optional fender that actually doesn't look too bad. That's one of the things with the Fox Podium. The fender that is supposed to come out at some point doesn't look that great, at least in my mind. It's one of those old school looking things that mounts up here. I think this design works pretty well. It's also a breakaway feature, so if you do somehow jam a rock or something in there, it's designed to kind of pops off like that, and you can put it back on. So yeah, pretty clever. It's pretty basic, just a plastic fender. Like I said, it costs $35, but it does do the trick. Let's see if I can do this and get it back on. Well, maybe not. Yes, I can do it. Doing it. Okay, there you go. It's back on. Yeah, it's got a breakaway feature. I've had to use that breakaway feature once. I sucked up a big stick, went right in there, popped that off, just pulled over, put it back on. I think without that, it probably would have broken the fender. So kind of a clever little thing. Brake line runs up here. 15 millimeter through axle. That's going to be a talking point that we're going to come back to later. But 15 millimeter through axle, and it's torque cap compatible. Another point that you'll want to keep in mind. Unlike the Fox Podium, that uses a 20 millimeter through axle. Push went with 15, which I kind of get because most bikes these days, aside from downhill bikes, do use a 15 millimeter through axle. But one thing you sacrifice by going with that through axle diameter is a little bit of stiffness. And that's one of the kind of main points of the ride impressions that we're almost up to. Along with all those adjustments, you have the coil spring, so you can swap that out according to your weight. I think there's 7 springs available, so you should be able to kind of get the one that works best for you. And there's also some preload spacers that you can insert just in order to get the preferred amount of sag. And when you do purchase a fork, it's an expensive fork, but when it shows up, Push will already know your kind of weight and riding style, and it comes with a little card, tells you how it's set up. And ideally, you can just go out, ride right away without too much fussing around. I'd say it's fairly simple to get set up and running. All right, it's time to get into how this fork rides. I've had it on 3 different bikes over the last 4 months or so. It started out on a Trek Fuel LX. That's kind of their 160, 170 enduro bike. I ran it up at Whistler Bike Park during crank work, so lots of big blown out brake bumps, holes, dry conditions, wet conditions. I've also had it on a full powered e-bike. That's the Specialized Levo 4. So that's 150 rear travel, put the 170 fork on there. And that's a pretty heavy bike, 52 pounds. I wanted to see how that would work with the force of that bigger e-bike. And I also put it on a mid-power e-bike, the Yeti MTE, and that has 145 millimeters of rear travel. Usually has a 160 fork, but it can accommodate a longer travel fork. So that went on there as well. So kind of gave me 3 of the different styles of bikes that I think people might be interested in putting this fork on. It does have adjustable travel. You can pull it apart, switch the orientation of a spacer, put it back together, and you can have a different stroke length. So it can be set from 140 all the way up to 170 millimeters. And I didn't mention either, but it can work for 29-inch or 27.5-inch wheels. There's different options. I've got the 29-inch 170 millimeter configuration that I rode on all those bikes that I just mentioned. Right off the bat, it's the initial suppleness that's the most noticeable. This is a coil sprung fork, and I have a feeling that a lot of people out there might not have been on coil sprung forks before. And it's pretty nice. It's very smooth. Even climbing, we don't talk about climbing performance with forks a lot because you're just they're not moving much, ideally, but that's kind of the first initial impression you'll have of this fork in many cases, and that's when that suppleness is very noticeable. Just those small undulations, if you're bumping up over some roots or chunky rock steps, goes into its travel nice and easily. It's super smooth. It just smooths the trail out. Let's see if I can say smooth again, right? But that's the best way to describe it. There's just minimal friction. I've done a great job of having a very low breakaway force with this fork, and so that suppleness is kind of the outstanding feature of it. When you're going downhill, that's the overwhelming sensation too. It does a great job of just getting out of the way, especially in that initial part of the travel. But there is something that comes into play, and that's the lack of stiffness. This fork, fore and aft, it's quite stiff. Almost feels, you could imagine it's close to a downhill fork at times. If you're just plowing straight ahead through a rock garden or something like that, it feels very stiff and plush. That type of scenario, I liked it. It feels good. However, when you do get into some chunkier, steeper, and twistier trails, kind of like in the Whistler Creekside zone, it does have some drawbacks, and you can feel the increased flex from the fork. I'm not the biggest rider. I'm about 160 pounds, but I could feel it. And sometimes it was strange, almost like it wanted to walk up. If you're kind of saying a chunky rut of a trail, almost like it wanted to walk up the side of the trail just because of that deflection that's occurring. As I dug into it deeper, it turns out that it really depends on what front hub you're using with this fork. If you use, say, a DT Swiss 350, a very common hub, a good hub, it doesn't work that well with this fork. It allows for extra flex. So I ended up switching to an Industry 9 hub, but it has a kind of a different axle setup, and that worked better. Also, torque caps are recommended in order to just get the maximum amount of stiffness out of this fork, because otherwise, this fork with a DT 350, it doesn't feel very good at all as far as the amount of flex goes. With a different hub, it does improve, it noticeably improves, and it gets a little closer, but you're still not getting the same amount of stiffness as you would get with a traditional right side up fork like a Fox 38. At the moment in this travel bracket, I'd say the Fox 38 is my favorite fork, and the push definitely isn't as stiff as that, especially in, like I said, those tighter, twistier, rough trails. On smoother trails, like when you go into jump, riding A-line, dirt merchant, things like that, felt pretty good. Does a great job of absorbing those braking bumps. It can definitely save your hands. Definitely a very comfortable fork. This wouldn't be the fork I would grab if I was gonna be an enduro racer. I think the weight and that extra flex, it's not really a race fork. But if you're someone that's riding some rough trails, but maybe not necessarily trying to be as fast as possible and super aggressive on your bike, but want that comfort, want it to be able to kind of conform and contour to the ground, this could work for that. The Subchamber, really cool feature. I did use that in the bike park, and even here on my home trails in Bellingham, it makes a difference. If you want to have that nice linear, just kind of feels like that bottomless sensation going through a good amount of the travel with the bigger hits, you can have it open, you close it off, and it starts ramping up more. Lets it sit up a little bit higher. Again, like I said, it was good for those jump trails or going on bigger drops. On a whole, for a coil sprung fork or for any fork, bottom out moments are handled super well. I didn't have any harshness. I think those features are really cool and clever, and they do work, and they're easy to use too. Kind of comes back to that flex. It is on the flexier side, at least as far as torsional rigidity. Fore and aft, it is very good. Again, I keep coming back to it. Plowing down stuff in a straight line, super great. Coil sprung, plush, you can just let off and go. When things get tighter and twistier, it can feel a little bit strange. My coworker, Dario DiGiulio, also tried it out. We both did some back-to-backs with this versus the Fox Podium. So I think we might as well take a moment to do that comparison. We start with the basics. Price, this fork is currently priced at $2,250, which is $250 more than the Podium. It also weighs around 300 grams or so more than the Podium. This is 2,950 grams, and the Podium is 2,000 600 something grams, so around 300 grams more than the Podium. And the Podium is already not a light fork, so we're looking at two kind of heavy, kind of pretty expensive upside down forks. On the trail, when it comes to just outright initial stroke suppleness, the Push does take the win. That initial kind of bit of travel, first 10% or so, is just very plush. I think that coil spring gets the credit there. Deeper in the travel, they both have a good range of adjustments, and I could find a happy spot on both of them. One pro for this fork is that even when you're adjusting the hydraulic bottom out, you have to adjust the air pressure. There wasn't any oil loss, where on the Podium, if you do adjust the air pressure, you have to be careful because the oil does like to squirt out a little bit from that air valve, and that can get right on your brake rotor. So yeah, point for the Push as far as kind of overall simplicity goes. The damping, the damper itself on the Podium is quieter, so that fork just runs quieter in general. You don't hear any noises. The Push is on the noisier side. I didn't find it to be distracting, but you can kind of hear the damper doing its job. Some people love that noise, some people don't. If I had to pick, I would go for totally silent fork, but I didn't really find it bothersome, but it is a thing to note. As far as the amount of control and adjustments, I think you can find a good place with both of them. The overall feel though, I do prefer the Podium. I just think that the way that it kind of rides in its travel, and I think the stiffness as well is coming into play. It's still not the stiffest fork. At the end of the day, if someone's just gonna ask me what fork would you get in this bracket, I would still pick the 38 over the Podium. I'm not as sold on the Podium as some people are. I just find the 38 feels better. I'm able to kind of predict and feel where the fork is in its travel a little bit better. Doesn't quite, I just feel like it's a better sensation for me. So I prefer the 38 over the Podium and over this. But if I was doing a little tiered ranking, I would put the 38 here, Podium here, and the Push here. I think again, Push, it's just not stiff enough, at least for the way that I want to ride, or the way I want it to feel. It feels good, but not stiff enough. All right, so Push 9.1 version 2. Who is it for? Well, like I mentioned earlier, I do think it's for someone that really just wants outright comfort and traction, as that's your ultimate goal, especially in wet, slippery conditions when you're going a little bit slower, but you just want that front wheel to be glued to the ground. The 9.1 does a great job. When it does falter a bit is in that rougher, twistier trails. That's when that stiffness just isn't there, and I think bigger riders may take issue with that. It's really gonna depend on your riding style, but I think comfort and traction take priority over outright stiffness. The weight is gonna be a thing too. If you're concerned about weight, it is a very heavy fork, and the price. So it's tricky. I'm super glad that they made this, and I think there's still room for improvement and refinement. I mean, I don't think it'd be that much work to redo the lowers so it could get a 20mm through axle on there, just in order to improve the stiffness. But the fork itself, it's well constructed. The subchamber is a clever feature. Compression, rebound, circuits, those all work well. So I think they've made a good fork, but it's not a great fork as far as price, weight, and performance goes. I mean, might seem kind of brutally honest, but that's what I'm here to do, is to tell you if you should get this fork or not. I do want more people to try it though, so if you get a chance, it's worth riding. I'd be curious to see what other people think, but in my experience doing back-to-back with this versus the Podium versus the 38, it does not come out on top. So, there you go. That's the Push 9.1 V2. Let us know what you think. You like it upside down? Do you want it right side up? 15mm through axle, 20mm through axle, coil sprung, air sprung. You let us know, and we'll keep coming back with more fork reviews in the future. It's about ready to rain, so I'll go outside. Thanks for watching, and don't forget, you can also check out the written review for even more insight into how this fork performs. Thanks for watching.